Welcome to The Lone Cure, the internet corner, where you will learn lifelong lessons in minutes of listening.
Today's read is Collapse: How Societies Choose to Fail or Succeed by Jared Diamond.
So if you like this summary, please consider reading the book itself since it is worth it.
And if you like this content, like and subscribe and check our channel for more.
Okay, so welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really digging into a book that honestly makes you think a lot. It's Collapse: How Societies Choose to Fail or Succeed by Jared Diamond.
Mm-hmm.
And we're basically going on this quest, right? Trying to understand this fundamental mystery. Why do some civilizations thrive for ages while others just fade away, leave behind ruins, questions?
Yeah, what makes them resilient or, fragile? That's the absolute core of what Diamond's exploring.
It sounds like a huge task.
It is. And his perspective, it's interesting because he's not just a historian. He's got this background in environmental science, but also real practical experience, rural life, even business.
Right, he dedicated the book to Montana ranchers, didn't he?
Exactly. He mentions this middle-of-the-road perspective.
Yeah.
So he gets the environmental issues, but he also understands, the economic realities people face.
Right.
His whole goal is figuring out what factors determine if a society sticks around or if it just, declines drastically. Population, politics, economy, social structure, the whole shebang over a long time.
So how does he even start to wrap his arms around that? What's the lens he uses?
Well, he lays out this really useful 5-point framework. Think of it like an analytical toolkit.
Okay, 5 points. What are they?
Right. So number 1, environmental damage. 2, climate change. 3, hostile neighbors. 4, friendly trade partners, specifically, the loss of them. And then the 5th one, and this is really the kicker, the most crucial one, a society's responses to its environmental problems.
Ah, the response.
Yeah. Because the first 4, they might be relevant, they might not, depending on the society. But that 5th one, how they choose to react or not react, that's always significant. And that framework, that's going to be our guide today. It helps you make sense of these really complex stories.
Okay, let's unpack this then. He starts with a really striking comparison right in the prologue, doesn't he?
He does. It grabs you immediately.
He talks about 2 dairy farms. One is Hull's Farm, which is thriving today in Montana, and the other is Gardar Farm from medieval Greenland.
Right. Miles apart, centuries apart, but at their peak, remarkably similar.
Yeah, both were like the biggest, most advanced farms around. Huge barns, cows, pastures, irrigation, hay production.
The owners were community leaders, religious. Both farms set in these beautiful landscapes, really parallel situations in many ways.
But here's the contrast, and it's stark.
Totally stark. Hull's Farm in Montana's Bitterroot Valley, it's doing great. The county's population is actually booming. It feels, permanent, right? You can't imagine it collapsing. You can't really imagine the U.S. collapsing. But Gardar Farm, the old bishop's manor in Norse Greenland, abandoned. Over 500 years ago, the entire Norse society there just vanished.
Vanished how?
Starvation, maybe conflict, emigration, they just disappeared. Left behind these stone walls, the barn, the cathedral, silent ruins.
Wow.
And Diamond uses this to hit you with the central warning of the book. When Gardar was at its height, its collapse would have seemed just as unthinkable as the collapse of Hull's Farm or the U.S. seems to us now.
So it forces you to question that feeling of permanence.
Exactly. It makes you ask, what could we be missing?
That really sets a sobering stage. Okay,
Yeah.
so let's dive into some of those historical examples where he applies this framework. How did those 5 factors actually play out? Maybe start with Easter Island.
Right. Easter Island. It's probably the most famous, maybe infamous example of societal collapse linked to environmental destruction. Diamond calls it the most extreme example of forest destruction in the Pacific.
The whole forest. Gone.
Every single native tree species
Right.
wiped out. And you can imagine the consequences. It wasn't just about losing shade.
No, I mean, think about it. No good for canoes, right?
Yeah.
So less fishing, no way to really travel between settlements easily.
Definitely. And no timber to move those giant stone statues, the moai, that the island is so famous for.
The irony there is just,
Okay.
wow. They needed the wood to move the symbols of their power and ingenuity, and then...
And then the wood was gone, so no more statues could be erected. They also lost materials for rope, for bark cloth. Wild foods from the forest disappeared. Crop yields likely dropped without the forest's protection. It was a cascade.
So the obvious question comes up, the one everyone asks, why? Why were they so seemingly foolish? How could they not see it coming?
It's complex. Diamond talks about psychological denial, kind of like, people living right below a dodgy dam who just ignore the risk because it's too uncomfortable to think about daily.
You just push it out of your mind.
Right. And resource depletion can be sneaky. It happens slowly, often masked by just like normal yearly ups and downs in rainfall or whatever. It's not always a sudden crisis until it is a sudden crisis.
Plus the whole tragedy of the commons thing, right? Getting everyone to agree to limit their use of a shared resource. That's hard.
Incredibly hard, especially if you have competing groups or chiefs. Short-term gain versus long-term survival. It's a classic human dilemma, really, not just ancient history.
Still, it's interesting. Diamond points out they weren't just victims of their environment. They were ingenious, too. This lithic mulch thing.
Oh, yeah, that's fascinating. Basically, rock gardening on a huge scale. They found that bringing stones into their fields helped retain moisture, moderated soil temperature.
And the yields.
Apparently way higher in some cases, like 4 times, even 50 times higher in mulched fields compared to unmulched ones. It shows real innovation adapting to a dry, windy place.
But even that wasn't enough in the end.
It seems not. The innovation couldn't overcome the fundamental loss of the entire forest ecosystem. It suggests maybe that technological fixes have limits. If the core resource management isn't sustainable, you need the courage to stop the underlying problem.
Okay, let's shift gears. From the Pacific to the American Southwest, the Anasazi. You mentioned Diamond uses tree rings there.
Yes, dendrochronology. It's amazing for the Southwest because the wood preserves well and the trees are sensitive to rainfall. So archaeologists get these incredibly precise dates for buildings, like down to the year they were constructed.
Wow.
And not just dates, but also year-by-year climate data, rainfall, drought. It gives you this incredibly clear picture of the environmental context they were living in.
So what did the tree rings reveal about, say, Chaco Canyon?
Well, they show a pattern you see repeated elsewhere. Population grows, the demands on the environment ratchet up, resources start getting depleted, things like deforestation, soil erosion, that's the slow burn, the ultimate cause. And then, bam, around AD 1130, the tree rings show a really severe drought hits. That acts as the proximate cause, the final push.
The straw that broke the camel's back.
Pretty much. And the society couldn't cope. You see the abandonment of these large, complex settlements like Chaco. Evidence suggests increased warfare, maybe even cannibalism in some areas, desperate times.
Hadn't they faced droughts before, though?
Oh, absolutely. Tree rings show earlier droughts, like around 1040 and 1090. But the key difference by 1130 was the combination of factors. Much higher population density this time.
Okay.
And the landscape itself was already degraded. The forests near the settlements were gone. Water tables had likely dropped. The environment just didn't have the resilience to bounce back, and neither did the society living there at that higher density. They'd used up their environmental buffer.
It's a sobering lesson in exceeding carrying capacity.
Definitely.
Let's look at another case, one that feels almost like a controlled experiment. Norse Greenland.
Right, because you had 2 groups sharing the same island, same climate challenges, the Norse Europeans and the Inuit who arrived later.
But radically different outcomes. The Norse, literate, Christian, European connection. They vanished. The Inuit survived.
Exactly. And Diamond argues it largely came down to societal choices and adaptability, or lack thereof. The Norse brought their European farming package, cattle, sheep, goats.
Which wasn't exactly ideal for Greenland's environment, I imagine.
Not really, especially the cattle. Very demanding. They stuck rigidly to this pastoral identity, building big barns, needing lots of hay. They also valued European goods, like iron.
So they were trying to maintain a European lifestyle in the Arctic.
Pretty much. And they largely ignored abundant local resources that the Inuit thrived on. Things like ringed seals, fish, whales even. The Norse hunted seals, yes, but not the ringed seals that were available year-round near their settlements. They preferred migratory harbor and harp seals.
What about those walrus hunts mentioned? The Nordicetta.
Ah, yes. Extremely dangerous expeditions way up north. They did it mainly for the walrus ivory tusks, which were highly valuable in Europe. It was their main connection, their main export to get the European goods they wanted, like iron and church bells.
But risky and maybe not sustainable.
Hugely risky, resource-intensive, and ultimately, as the climate got colder and sea ice increased, probably harder and harder. And their connection to Europe frayed anyway over time.
And the archaeology. Does it show signs of stress?
Oh, absolutely. Grim evidence. Later settlements show signs of desperation, people eating their dogs, even slaughtering newborn calves they would desperately need for the future. There's that one mass grave from early on suggesting internal conflict or maybe an attack.
So multiple pressures closing in. Climate change, loss of contact with Europe, maybe conflict with the Inuit.
All contributing. But Diamond's point is, it wasn't just the environment. It was their refusal or inability to fundamentally change their core values and practices. To learn from the Inuit, perhaps. To stop prioritizing cattle over seals, or stop clinging to that European identity at all costs.
Their collapse wasn't inevitable. It was chosen, in a way.
That's the argument, yeah. A tragic failure to adapt by making painful choices about what they valued most.
Okay, but the book isn't only about failure, right? Diamond also looks at societies that did manage to figure things out. Success stories.
Definitely. And these are just as important for the lessons they offer. We need to know what works, not just what doesn't.
So where do we look for examples of success? Iceland, maybe?
Iceland is a great example.
Yeah.
Because they started out making similar mistakes to the Norse in Greenland, actually.
Really? How so?
Well, the settlers, mostly from Norway, brought sheep farming practices that worked in Norway, but were disastrous for Iceland's fragile volcanic soils and thin woodlands. They caused massive deforestation, huge soil erosion. Iceland became, for centuries, like Europe's poorest country, ecologically devastated.
But they turned it around.
They did, eventually. They learned. They realized the old ways weren't working. They developed a much more conservative approach, focused on protecting the resources they had left, strict environmental rules, careful management. And now, Iceland is one of the most affluent, well-managed societies in the world. It took time and hard lessons, but they adapted. They changed their approach based on experience.
That's quite a turnaround. What about somewhere totally different, like Tikopia?
Ah, Tikopia, a tiny, incredibly isolated island in the Pacific. Maybe a square mile and a half, that's it. But people lived there sustainably for something like 3,000 years.
3,000 years? On a tiny island? How?
Through incredibly clever resource management and, crucially, population control. Because they were so isolated, they had to be self-sufficient. There was no escape, no importing food if things went wrong.
But what do?
They developed this amazing food system, basically a multi-story orchard that mimics a natural rainforest, packed with edible plants, very efficient. They had ways to store surplus food for emergencies, like fermenting breadfruit.
And the population part, that sounds difficult.
It must have been. But they apparently practiced various forms of population control explicitly. And perhaps the most striking example of making tough choices, they completely eliminated pigs from the island.
Eliminated pigs. Weren't pigs like a big deal in Melanesian cultures? Status symbols.
Huge deal. But on tiny Tikopia, the pigs competed with humans for food and were ecologically destructive. So they made the incredibly difficult decision to get rid of them entirely for the sake of long-term survival. That takes real societal courage to abandon something so culturally valued.
Wow. Okay, another success story. Tokugawa, Japan. Different scale entirely.
Right. Japan faced massive deforestation problems by the 17th century. They were running out of wood, which was critical for building, fuel, everything.
But they managed to reverse it.
Yeah.
How? Was it bottom up, like Tikopia, or...?
More top-down, actually. Under the Tokugawa shogunate, Japan had stable, centralized leadership. And these leaders recognized the crisis and took long-term action.
Like what?
They implemented serious forest management, plantation forestry, regulating timber cutting, investing in reforestation. They knew they couldn't just keep cutting forever.
Were there technological innovations too?
Yeah, things like developing more efficient wood-burning stoves to reduce fuel demand, coppicing techniques for sustainable wood harvesting, even widespread paper recycling. They tackled both supply and demand.
And Diamond suggests their isolation helped.
He does. Japan was largely closed off from the world during that period. They knew they had to live within their own means, on their own islands. They couldn't just import resources or export their problems. That fostered a kind of collective long-term thinking.
Interesting. One more contrast. The Dominican Republic versus Haiti, sharing the same island, Hispaniola.
Yeah, this one really highlights the role of leadership and institutions. Same island, similar environments in many ways, but drastically different outcomes.
The DR is much wealthier, much more forest cover, right? Haiti is tragically deforested.
Exactly. Haiti has maybe 1% forest cover left. The DR has closer to 28%.
Why such a huge difference?
Diamond argues it's less about subtle environmental differences and more about different histories of governance and policy. Even autocratic, frankly nasty leaders in the Dominican Republic, like Trujillo and Balaguer,
for their own reasons, sometimes self-serving, ended up implementing strong environmental protections. They set up national parks, enforced logging bans, partly because they saw the economic benefit of watershed protection for agriculture and hydroelectricity.
So top-down action again, even if the motives weren't purely environmental.
Right. And in the DR, you also saw the emergence of bottom-up environmental organizations later on. So a combination of factors led to better environmental outcomes compared to Haiti, which suffered from political instability, poverty, and less effective governance regarding resource management. It really underscores that fifth factor. Societal response matters immensely.
Okay, so taking all these historical lessons, collapses and successes, how does Diamond connect this to us now, to the modern world?
Well, first, he reminds us that collapses aren't just ancient history. Think Somalia, Rwanda, Haiti. These are recent or ongoing crises with environmental factors intertwined with political and social ones.
Right, it's not something that just used to happen. Exactly. And then he identifies the big threats facing global civilization today. He lists 12 major problems. 8 of them are the same kinds of issues that undermined past societies: deforestation, soil loss, water management problems, overfishing, etc.
Okay, the classics.
But then he adds 4 new ones, unique to our modern, globalized, high-tech world.
Which are?
Human-caused climate change, the buildup of toxic chemicals in the environment, energy shortages, our dependence on fossil fuels, and finally, the fact that humans are now using up almost all of the Earth's available photosynthetic capacity, basically, the total plant growth potential of the planet.
That last one sounds fundamental.
It is. And he argues that most of these 12 threats could become critical on a global scale within the next few decades if we don't change course.
Now, people hear warnings like this,
Yeah.
and sometimes the reaction is skepticism, right? Oh, we've heard these alarms before, or technology will solve it.
And Diamond addresses that directly. He uses this great analogy of a fire alarm. You don't tear out your fire alarms just because you had a few false alarms, or because the fire department put out a small fire easily last time. The potential cost of ignoring a real fire is just too catastrophic.
So it's about prudence. Better safe than sorry when the stakes are planetary.
Exactly. It's about taking warnings seriously and acting before the crisis is undeniable, because by then it might be too late, just like for the Easter Islanders or the Anasazi. Anticipatory action, not just reactive.
What about the role of business in all this? He talks about the tragedy of the commons in relation to industries, doesn't he?
He does. Industries like mining, logging, fishing, they often face this inherent conflict between maximizing short-term profit and ensuring the long-term health of the resource they depend on.
Like the mining companies declaring bankruptcy to avoid cleanup.
Yeah, that's a classic example. Privatize the profits, socialize the costs, leave the toxic mess for the taxpayer to deal with. He contrasts different approaches even within the same industry, like oil companies. Some, like Chevron in Papua New Guinea, found it was actually in their interest to operate more cleanly because empowered local landowners could literally shut them down if they caused too much damage. Others, less so.
So external pressure matters.
Hugely. And this is where Diamond brings in the power of the public. You, me, the consumers.
How so?
Through our choices. He points to things like the Forest Stewardship Council, FSC, for timber. When you choose to buy wood products with an FSC label, you're supporting sustainable forestry. That consumer demand pushes companies to get certified.
Like voting with your wallet.
Exactly. Same idea with the Marine Stewardship Council, MSC, for seafood. Choosing certified sustainable fish helps protect fisheries from collapse. Public pressure, whether through purchasing power or political action, can genuinely influence corporate behavior towards sustainability. It's not the only solution, but it's a powerful lever.
He also touches on population, which is always a sensitive topic.
Right. And he makes a really crucial point. It's not just about the total number of people in, say, developing countries. The bigger issue is the total human impact.
Rami.
Meaning, as people in developing nations understandably aspire to first world consumption levels, cars, bigger houses, more meat, more stuff, their individual environmental impact skyrockets. So you have billions of low-impact people striving to become high-impact people. That multiplication effect is enormous.
And it means wealthy nations can't just point fingers.
Absolutely not. In fact, per person, consumption rates are vastly higher in rich countries. And we're not immune to environmental problems ourselves, even if we think we are. Diamond mentions things anyone in a major city experiences: traffic congestion, insane housing costs, air pollution. These are quality of life issues directly linked to resource use and population density in affluent societies.
Yeah, you don't escape it just by being rich.
No. And he stresses the link between environmental problems and political instability. They often go hand in hand. Desperate people, people who are hungry, lack resources, lack hope, are more likely to blame governments, emigrate illegally, fight amongst themselves, maybe even turn to extremism or terrorism.
So environmental problems aren't just environmental, they're security problems, economic problems.
Exactly. Everything is connected now. Diamond uses the metaphor of the world being one polder, like the reclaimed land in the Netherlands protected by dikes. If the dike breaks anywhere, everyone inside gets flooded. Problems in Somalia or Afghanistan aren't isolated anymore. They can ripple outwards and affect everyone. There's nowhere else to go.
Okay, so wrapping this all up, after looking at all these societies, failed and successful, what's the single biggest takeaway? The sort of final, maybe uncomfortable lesson?
I think it comes down to the courage. The courage to re-examine and potentially change our most deeply held values when they conflict with reality.
Can you give examples?
Well, think back. The Greenland Knolls failed, partly because they couldn't let go of their identity as European cattle farmers in the Arctic. They clung to that value even when it was killing them.
Right.
Contrast that with the Tecopians. They did have the courage to eliminate pigs, a core status symbol, because they recognized the ecological necessity. Or think about Australia today, grappling with its identity, realizing that trying to be a British agricultural society on a dry Australian continent requires some serious reevaluation.
Making painful choices about what really matters for survival versus what's tradition or habit.
Precisely. It often involves questioning things that seem fundamental to who we think we are.
So the final thought for you listening to this is really about us today as a global society. We face our own set of potentially existential environmental challenges. What are the cherished values, the core beliefs, the ingrained behaviors that we are clinging to, maybe out of habit or comfort, that might actually be hindering our ability to navigate these challenges successfully? What traditions or assumptions no longer serve us?
And what difficult anticipatory decisions do we need to make now? Decisions that require that long-term thinking, that courage Diamond highlights, instead of just reacting to the latest crisis or focusing on the next quarter's profits or the next election cycle.
It really comes down to choice, doesn't it? The past shows us it's possible to fail and possible to succeed.
The question is, which path will we choose? And do we have the collective wisdom and courage to learn from those who came before us? That's the challenge Diamond leaves us with.